Good day, my dear students. Welcome to our class on bioethics and sexual ethics. Our topic for today's lecture is about human sexuality, and I shall develop 3 points for this lecture. First, what is human sexuality? Second, the Christian view of sexuality. Third, sexuality and friendship. When you hear the term human sexuality, what first comes to your mind? Sexuality refers to all the dimensions of our human nature: psychological, social, intellectual, and physical. It is our way of living out our nature as men or women. Sex, which is a part of sexuality, refers mainly to the genital organs and their use. So human sexuality is not just about the sexual act. It is more broader than that. Sexuality is more than just engaging in sex. It is our way of being male and female in the world, our way of being, our way of existing as men and women. And we know that man and woman are different in many aspects. Psychological aspect, in the way how they think. There is a saying that says, in man, the head reigns, but in woman, the heart reigns. It means to say that men are more logical in thinking, while women are more emotional. In terms of the intellectual capacity, in terms of physical differences, the genital organs, the physical strength, the composition of the body. Man has more robust bones and a stronger body build compared to women. They say that women have a higher average life expectancy than men. Man and woman have their own differences, and they both have their strengths and weaknesses. What I would like to point out is that the term human sexuality is more than just a sexual act. We speak of sexuality and sex as two different realities. We read from this document, human sexuality is not something purely biological, rather it concerns the intimate nucleus of the person. Human sexuality is a fundamental component of personality, one of its modes of being, of manifestation, of communicating with others, of feeling, of expressing, and of living human love. It means to say that human sexuality is very much part of our nature as human beings. We look at the biological dimension of human sexuality. In terms of chromosomal sex, human being has 46 chromosomes. These chromosomes is unique to each of us. It contains a genetic information, how you will look, the color of your skin, the color of your hair, the color of your eye. And this set of chromosomes also determines the biological sex of a person. Also, the genital sex. It's very obvious that man and woman have different sexual organs. And that is the biological dimension of human sexuality. Let us go to the personal dimension of human sexuality. Human person is a unity of body and spirit. So when we talk about human sexuality, it's not just about the body, but even the spiritual components that make up a man or a woman. That is part of human sexuality. Sexuality touches the whole person. Sexuality is complementariness and communion, and sexuality implies a close relationship between love and procreation. So, human sexuality is also calling us to a relationship of love as we relate with other persons. No man is an island and we are social beings. In the words of the German existentialist philosopher Heidegger, He said that man is not just in the world, in the Weltsein. Man is also being with others, Mitsein. No? And that longing to relate with others and not just to be close to oneself, that is part of human sexuality. No? Thus we read, human sexuality is our physiological and psychological grounding of our capacity to love. Sexuality is a basic way in which we profess both our incompleteness and our relatedness. It is God's ingenious way of calling us into communion with others through our need to reach out and touch and embrace emotionally, intellectually, and physically. Sexuality plays a very important role in the way how we relate with other persons. Sexuality reminds us that we are incomplete on our own. So that longing, that drive in us to relate with other persons. And we can also mention our longing for God comes from human sexuality. At this point, we would like to ask the help of John Paul II to enlighten us about the reality of our sexual desires, which is part of human sexuality. We ask the question, is man's sexual drive an instinct or an urge? What is the difference between an instinct and an urge? We read from the book of Karol Wojtyla. An instinct is merely a reflex mode of action, not dependent on conscious thought. Since man, however, is a being who is by nature capable of rising above instinct in his actions and can do so in the sexual sphere as well as elsewhere, it is far better to speak of the sexual urge. What is the difference between an instinct or an urge? An instinct, it is more proper to talk of instinct when we refer to animals because they are not rational beings. They do not have control over their sexual urges. If they feel the sexual urge, they naturally do it. That is their natural reaction because it is an instinct. Animals do not care whether they do it in public or in private. It is just a natural reaction to the sexual drive. On the other hand, it is more proper to talk of sexual urge when we refer to human beings because unlike animals, we, human beings, can control our urge. We are capable of rising above our instinct. Instinct is a natural reaction to a stimulus, whereas an urge, it is something that human beings can control because of our rational nature. So when we speak of sexual drives, John Paul II says it is more of an urge when it refers to sexual drives of human beings. We read, the sexual urge in this conception is a natural drive born in all human beings, a vector of aspiration along which their whole existence develops and perfects itself from within. In man, sexual urge is subordinate to the will. In animals, it is an instinct. So if you feel this sexual urge as a human being, that is natural. And John Paul II emphasizes in his book, Love and Responsibility, that yes, it is part of our nature as human beings, but we can control our sexual drives unlike animals. We have power over our sexual urges. Karol Wojtyla, or John Paul II, also talks about sexual urge as self-giving urge. Sexual urge is there for man's use, but it must never be used in absence or in a way that it contradicts love. Sexual urge is there to direct us to others, which is love, and not to ourselves, which is lust. Karol Wojtyla emphasizes that the actuation of the sexual urge in human beings must always be in the context of love and not lust. What is the difference between love and lust? Lust is self-centeredness. It is using the person as an object to satisfy one's pleasure, one's need. Whereas the proper response to a person is love. And Aquinas says, love is not just a feeling or an urge, it is an act of the will to will the good of the other. And John Paul emphasizes that persons must never be used as objects. They must be respected and loved. We read the virtue of chastity, whose function it is to free love from utilitarian attitudes, must control not only sensuality, but carnal concupiscence as such. But perhaps more important, those centers deep within the human being in which the utilitarian attitude is hatched and grows. So what will help us to avoid lust or the utilitarian attitude in the way how we relate with other persons is the virtue of chastity. Chastity serves as our guide in loving. It enables us to relate with other persons not as objects, but to relate with them in the context of love, loving the person as who or she is. Chastity is the virtue enabling a person to come into possession of his sexual desires and feelings, not to be possessed by them, so that he can give himself away in love to others, particularly to persons of the other sex. Chastity is not so much a repression of our sexual desires. It is more of redirecting them so that in our way of relating with other persons, we will end up not using them, but loving them. There's a difference between chastity and abstinence. Not all who abstain are chaste. Chastity refers to what is happening in our heart, while abstinence refers to what is not happening in my body. I may appear to be chaste when I abstain, but the final say is, what is really happening in your heart? How do you look at the person? Do you look at the person as an object to be used or as someone to be loved and respected? So chastity redirects us to love and not to lust. So for example, if a friend hugged you and you felt attracted to her body, that is natural, part of human nature. But chastity will remind you, love the person, do not use the person as an object for selfish reasons. And all of this happens in the heart. Chastity speaks of the purity of our heart. It redirects our sexual desires to love the person. We now go to some concepts on John Paul II's Theology of the Body. The Theology of the Body is actually a series of biblical reflections given by John Paul II during his papacy, and he delivered this reflection for almost 5 years during his Wednesday talks. And the entire catechesis seeks to answer two main questions. First, what does it mean to become a human person, a male and a female? The question of identity. And second, how can I live my life in a way that I can become truly happy and whole? A question of vocation. The theology of the body emphasizes that the body is not just biological, it is also theological. Meaning to say, we can look at our body and derive from it certain truths that can lead us to God. At the same time, the theology of the body emphasizes that we Catholics do not reject the human body. We do not see the human body as something that is evil and impure. Some religious people would focus more on spiritual things and are not comfortable talking about the body. That is inconsistent with our faith. Let us not forget the body is also theological, and that the Word, Jesus, became flesh and dwelt among us. We read, the body, in fact, and only the body, is capable of making visible what is invisible, the spiritual and the divine. Our body can lead us to God. It is a sign that points us to God. But the question is, why is it difficult to grasp now? If you see a body, you do not automatically think of God. Why? Well, because of the reality of sin. Sin distorted our conception of the body that is capable of leading us to God. And this is what Christopher West says. Tragically, because of sin, the body loses its character as a sign. Not objectively, but subjectively. The sign that the body can lead us to God. John Paul II also talks about the spousal analogy in his Theology of the Body. And he uses several biblical passages to explain the spousal analogy. And we read some from the letter of Paul to the Ephesians. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. And from the book of Isaiah, for as a young man marries a virgin, so shall your Maker marry you. And as a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. What images do we see in these scripture passages? The image of marriage and the family. Theology of the Body also points out that these verses can also talk about God's love for humanity. And this is the spousal analogy. We can look at it from that point of view, not just from the point of view of human love, but from the point of view of God loving humanity. Like for example, in the letter of Paul to the Ephesians, we can interpret it as Jesus Christ leaving the Father in heaven, and Christ also leaving the home of his mother on earth, Mary, to give up his body for humanity, for the bride, so that we might become one flesh with him. So in the spousal analogy, when John Paul II talks about the relationship of love between God and humanity, God is always the bridegroom and the humanity is always the bride. We read, in the spousal analogy, God is always the bridegroom and humanity is always the bride. Why? Because humanity is first receptive to the love of God, and this is love, not that we loved God, but that He first loved us. The woman's body primarily tells a story of receiving divine love, while the man's body primarily tells the story of offering that love, of pouring it out. Pope Francis mentioned in his encyclical Amoris Laetitia, the very word used in the scripture to describe marital union, to live or to be joined, is used to describe our union with God. My soul clings to you. So, if the marital act is actually the main sign on this world of our call to union with God, why is it that it is not clear to us now? Again, it's because of sin. Sin caused us to look at sex in a distorted manner, in a utilitarian manner. So Christopher West tells us, the true solution to pornographic distortions of the body is not the rejection of the body, but the redemption of the body. The untwisting of what sin has twisted, so we can recover the true glory, splendor, and inestimable value of the body. And that is the challenge presented to us now. The redemption of the body deformed by sin. So with this, what are some of the truths that we can emphasize on the Christian view of human sexuality? First, the body and sexuality are created by God. And since they are created by God, all things created by God are good. It implies that the body and sexuality are also good. However, we are wounded by sin. Sin distorts our vision, the way how we look at body and sexuality. But there is hope despite our being woundedness, because the whole person, and that includes sexuality, is redeemed by Christ and renewed by the Holy Spirit. Let us look at some points on the Christian sexual ethics. First, sex is good because it is something that is created by God. Sex is a gift from God and a task for man and woman. And the task is to love and not to use the person. Sex is relational and heterosexual. It is a thou relationship, a relationship with another person, with the opposite sex. Sex is ordered to love and to marriage. Marriage safeguards true love. Any marital act, any sex outside marriage is not love, it is lust. Using the person as an object to be used to satisfy one's pleasure. The end of sexuality is procreation. We talk of the two aspects of the marital act that can never be separated. The unitive aspect, the union of the couples, and the procreative aspect being open to life. The actuations of sex is proper only within marriage, mutual self-giving, and human procreation in the context of true love. And husband and wife are obliged to practice responsible parenthood. Humanae Vitae 10 tells us married love requires responsible parenthood. And responsible parenthood includes the use of natural family planning and also the proper birth spacing, taking into consideration the physical, social, and economic condition of the family, the couple's plan on how many children they will have at the moment. So in summary, we read, the ethical actuation of sex, the complementing each other, is ethically realized by man and woman only in a human relationship. Human because it is against bestiality, relational because it is against masturbation, which is solitary, heterosexual because it is against homosexual actuations of sex, marital because it is against premarital sex, fornication, adultery, and sodomy, faithful because it is against divorce, and open to life relationship because it is against abortion and contraception. We now go to the last part of our lecture about sexuality and friendship. If human sexuality drives us to be in a relationship with other persons, friendship is part of it. And we say here we all need friends and a few close friends. The book of Sirach tells us, a faithful friend is a sturdy shelter. He who finds one finds a treasure. A faithful friend is beyond price. No sum can balance his worth. A faithful friend is a life-saving remedy. It says here, a true friend is really priceless. If you have a true friend, treasure them. And who is a true friend? A true friend is one who knows you as you are, understands where you have been, accepts who you have become, and still gently invites you to grow. And this is what we call the love between friends, the love that seeks the good of the other, the love that helps the person become a better one. Friendship is love without the erotic dimension and the deeply religious dimension of agape. Aristotle says, without friends, who would want to live? Friendship is the most needed thing. So you can be friends with anyone, even if you are a celibate person. You just need to know and define the boundaries of the friendship. We can be friends with others, but no to exclusivity. We should observe boundaries. Remember that our nature is fragile and we can easily be tempted. Remember, friendship is being in love with another person, but without the erotic dimension. A love that is characterized by agape, a self-giving love. Do not be anxious or jealous over a friend. There is a saying here, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it is yours. If it doesn't, it never was. No? Being possessive and being jealous are two forms of hatred, and we need to be careful with these feelings in friendship. No? It can ruin the purity of friendship. In priestly and religious life, spiritual friendship is important. Aristotle writes, "The man who is to be happy will therefore need virtuous friends." The goal of spiritual friendship is to help each other grow in holiness and virtue. And virtues show us the real path to happiness. If you have virtuous friends, treasure them, for they will help you become more virtuous and more happy in this life. That ends our lecture for today. Keep safe, everyone, and God bless.